Good afternoon from Jakarta. Welcome and thank you everyone to participate in today's ASEAN-IEA webinars on regulatory frameworks and the role of governments in building policy development. First of all, before we start the webinar, let us sharing with you some housekeeping information to run this webinar smoothly. We thank your understanding in advance. So participants should ensure convenient environment and reduce background noises such as turn off cell phones and etc. Participants should mute their microphone and only unmute if they wish to present. Participants should only turn off their video's camera when presenting or making an intervention, as turning on the video may impact the quality of the connection and voice quality. For Q&A sessions, those who wish to speak may use the chat room, typing their country and name and send it to everyone. The moderator will acknowledge the request to speak and determine the speaking order. Once the moderator acknowledges, they may turn on the video. Only unmute the microphone once you are called by the moderator to speak. So this webinar is hosted by the ASEAN Center for Energy and jointly organized with IEA and the ASEAN Secretariat under the funding support of the ADCP2. This webinar will explore best practices for designing and implementing buildings policy and pathways to a zero-emission, efficient, and resilient building and construction sectors. This event aims to bring together expert policymakers, academics, architects, and engineers, as well as industry representatives from across Southeast Asia to share their knowledge and experience on building energy efficiency. So for your information, again, this webinar is part of a collaborative project between the IEA and the ASEAN member state through the Energy Efficiency and Conservation Subsector Network, the ASEAN Secretariat, and the ASEAN Center for Energy, and is supported by the ASEAN-Australia Development Cooperation Program Phase 2, ADCP2, to develop regional roadmap for building and space cooling. Next, please. So we honored to have some list of very knowledgeable and very capable resources and moderator today in today's webinar. This webinar will be moderated by Dr. Ian Hamilton, Associate Professor, USL Energy Institute and International Energy Agency. And also some list of panelists, Dr. Kate Wilson, Executive Director, Climate Change and Sustainability Government of New South Wales, Australia, and Dr. Michael Webel, Department of Human Geography, University of Hamburg, and Dr. Dick Sweet, Institute for Building Energetics, Thermotechnology and Energy Storage, University of Stuttgart. And also from ASEAN member state, Cambodia, Mr. Sok Painop, Deputy Director, Department of Green Economy, Ministry of Environment, Cambodia, and our colleagues from World Bank, Dr. Xiaodong Wang, Infrastructure Program Leader from the World Bank. Next, please. Just to reiterate the agenda for today's webinars. So this today's webinar will be last for 2 hours. So here's the outline of the agendas for our today's webinar. So we started with the introduction and the overview of this webinar, and will be followed by the panelist sessions. We will have from Dr. Kate Wilson on NSW government approach to making building more sustainable. And we will have a presentation from Dr. Michael Webel on Build for People project, and from Dr. Dirk Schuit regarding climate adapted materials research for the social economic content of Vietnam, Mr. Sokik Nop on the development of Cambodia's guideline on certification to the green building, and from Dr. Xiaodong Wang, improving building energy efficiency in South Asia. And after that, we will follow 10 minutes, will follow by Q&A sessions. And at the end of the webinar, we will have closing remarks. And I think that's all the agenda, the overall agenda of the webinar, of today's webinar. Next, please. So just to share to everyone that this project direction actually aligned with the program area number 4 of energy efficiency and conservation. Under the ASEAN Plan of Action for Energy Cooperation, phase 2 to support the reduction of energy intensity at 32% by 2025 in ASEAN region, and particularly aligned with the outcome-based strategies under the APEC phase 2, especially on the harmonized standard, where ASEAN also is looking at roadmap to develop roadmap for harmonized standard for AC and other home appliances, and also aligned with the outcome-based strategy on towards net zero building under the APEC, especially for the green building roadmap. Next, please. So for your information, this project approach aims to provide a vision statement regarding what actually the sustainable carbon future looks like and aims to achieve, and also to provide to have an assessment framework to discuss the element being assessed, focusing on the policy elements needed to secure a sustainable low carbon buildings and cooling stock, and also aims to provide a current status of energy efficiency and building in ASEAN, including to see what actually the future goals and multiple benefits on the buildings and cooling, and including the last one is the action and strategy and tracking progress in order to check how we ASEAN in particular get there, and how we know that ASEAN will be on track to achieve the goals. I think that's all the introduction. Before I hand it over to Dr. Ian to facilitate the panel session, I think I'd like to request our intern Dianda to facilitate the group photo. I think I'd like to invite every speakers to turn on your camera, please. Dianda, please give the sign.
Thank you, Rio. So I suppose if we take a group photo, we can do that. At least I'll snap a little photo anyways as we go through. So thanks very much, Rio, and I really appreciate everybody joining today. We're really excited to be able to go over what we think is an interesting program, and of course, some very distinguished speakers who are joining us today. So I'll speak to the activity that we've undertaken, as Rio has introduced, around the roadmaps for building and construction for ASEAN, and really then to just highlight some of the key issues that we'd like to try and cover. But really this webinar is about better understanding the role of governments in buildings policy development. And so I'll go now through a set of slides before introducing, before bringing on our panel speakers, and just say that we'll pick up some questions as we go through. So if you do have questions that you'd like to ask the group, please do enter them into the question panel, which you can see on the side, and we'll do our best to pick those up. We'll have a few short remarks following each presentation where we might pick up on some issues or ideas, and then we'll, after the last presentation, we'll come back together as a group and we'll go through a set of panel questions. So either have questions as you see a presentation, please enter them, or you can also have another opportunity at the end. So thanks very much, and now I'll give my presentation. So in the next slide, and following this, one of the most recent publications from the IEA is looking at how it is that the net zero economy will be achieved for 2050. So net zero emissions are real important aspect of being able to address and meet the goals of the Paris Agreement. And really the buildings sector is incredibly important in that, and partly because when we look at energy related emissions, energy use, buildings globally comprise a substantial proportion. We're looking at in terms of non-residential buildings, residential buildings around energy, but also the construction industry use energy as a part of that building development. And when we're looking at the emissions, of course, it's related to that. And that's why when we also think through around designing and operating buildings, we have to think about their embodied carbon. So the amount of energy that's gone in, the amount of carbon that's gone into producing the materials. This is a really important aspect of where we have buildings today. So, a third of emissions, a third of energy associated with buildings and their construction globally. So in the next slide, this latest publication from the IEA, Net Zero by 2050, where there's a link below, highlights what it is would be necessary in order to undertake a shift around the building sector to achieve these goals. And a lot of this has associated relation around obviously electrification on one hand, to be able to remove fossil fuels from use in buildings, but also to highlight that energy efficiency is another incredibly important aspect of that. That means not only our existing buildings, but of course ensuring the buildings that are being built during this time are done so in a way that is ready for net zero and achieving net zero as both the grid decarbonizes and demands for different energy for heating, for cooking, for lighting and the like are also decarbonized. So in the next slide, just to highlight that electrification and energy efficiency takes 70% of that strategy. So as we see in particular from today, end uses around, and if we look here, particularly around growing end uses such as cooling, the need to shift towards electricity by 2050 is really considerable. So not only, of course, are we facing the reality of needing to service more demand, and especially in the regions such as the ASEAN, it will be focused around space cooling and more access to lighting, cooking, and appliances, to also do so in a way that is more efficient. And that's really critical here, not only from 2020 to 2050 today globally, these are global numbers, we have to meet more demand than ever, but do so more efficiently than ever. And so in the next slide, the idea here, particularly for this is an example around homes, but what the strategy and the focus is, we need to be able to decarbonize the existing buildings so that they're retrofit towards zero carbon. And that's, of course, a real challenge, but it takes focus around building envelopes. That means not only buildings, in terms of appliances and heating systems to be zero carbon, but also to look at how we're constructing those buildings such a way that they avoid needing certain types of energy demands to begin with. So in particularly looking at how we can build more efficiently, for example, for cooling, using shades, using solar control, using glazing that is more appropriate, and avoid some of the solar gains that would otherwise need cooling. And then, of course, for again, globally, the heating stock will have to shift towards heat pumps. So the advantage there is for being able to provide heating, but also in regions for as well cooling. So in the next slide, I wanted to speak just a few ideas around net zero, and what this slide is showing for the Southeast Asian region is between 2018 and 2040 under an energy policy, the stated energy policy, in other words, the kind of business as usual, but that we've focused on achieving certain objectives. But this is effectively what we would say is announced. And in order to go towards 2040 sustainable development scenario, this is, of course, not the net zero that I just showed you, but this is one that was aiming to achieve aspects of the Paris Agreement. So this was slightly earlier scenario, but energy efficiency as well takes a real important role in Southeast Asia. Equipment efficiency is a big part of that story around efficiency, and in particular also decarbonizing power. So in the next slide, thank you, and yes. So in the next slide, what I want to do is just highlight to you first the regional roadmap that we developed over the course of 18 months, about a year ago. And what it did was it set out and provided a comprehensive framework that would look across 8 themes. And the 8 themes were really focused on how one gets ready for producing and for establishing net zero energy buildings that are sustainable and resilient in a changing climate. And so looking at urban planning, materials, new and existing buildings, systems and operations, and resilience and clean energy. We drew in stakeholder comments and input from across the region, over 200 responses in ASEAN and Southeast Asia. And we established that. And I really encourage you to look at this regional roadmap. But what that regional roadmap did was highlight what would be the key elements needed in terms of policies and targets, policies and technologies between now and 2050. But what this ASEAN roadmap will be doing, and the opportunity we see here, is to, on one hand, differentiate between the different member states. It's very important that such a roadmap is designed so that it is contextually specific, but also building on the roadmap to look at strategies, to look at what are the ingredients needed to achieve the goals that are set out in this regional roadmap. And that's where we want to be able to draw in from your own expertise, from all of you who are listening today who have interest in this area, who have experience in this area, and to be able to focus on those targeted and specific actions needed to secure this outcome. So in the next slide, our development of this ASEAN roadmap is first to undertake a process of establishing a strategy and strategy elements and getting input and comments on those. So we're in this process now. We've been compiling information for all the different countries and from those stakeholders and leads within the ASEAN member states for each country, and looking at policies, technologies, and the like. And then to propose a set of milestones for achieving near-term actions and, of course, the long-term objective of net zero carbon buildings. And then finally to look through and establish key actions and responsibilities of those who could undertake this, and to highlight best practice and case study examples. So in terms of, for those of you who are listening today, we're looking to you all to help us in doing this and to contribute to this process to make sure it reflects your experience. And the next slide. Obviously, these will be very difficult to read, but we will be sharing them and making this available. But we have these 7 themes, looking at new buildings, existing buildings, system operations, materials, resilience, urban planning, and clean energy. And there's a vision associated with each one. And I'll go to one as an example in a moment. But then in the white boxes, what we're showing are a set of key action areas that are needed to facilitate this vision. And so in the next slide, the idea being that under new buildings, I apologize, it's still a little bit hard to read, a vision of new buildings are designed such that they enable high levels of thermal comfort, energy efficient, resulting in a comfortable and affordable low carbon building. So, really focused on the design aspects here. And in doing so, strengthening and the adoption and compliance of building energy codes, and who the responsible organizations would be around that, boosting market demand for efficient and low carbon buildings, the private sector being a key member there. We have a subsequent webinar which we'll be holding later in the summer, later in June and July. And then boosting capacity and delivery of those efficient low carbon buildings. So looking to the designers and developers. And in the next slide, with each one of those blocks, we build that out and we look at establishing a current status for each, and then what are the actions by 2025, 2030, and for net zero carbon. And in the next slide, oh, I see. If you just keep pressing next for a few, these things will come up. So we have the strategy element, we have timeframes. Oh, I might go back to the last just for a moment. And to establish here as well examples and targeted actions. So I'll go to the next slide, and this is the final one that I'll use, just to say that we have a website and we have a survey, and the survey will help us in 2 ways for all of you to contribute to that, is to go to an input on the current status and how common you might see certain technologies or policies, and by what point. So giving your assessment about by when things could be achieved. And so the final slide is really just this final steps. If we just go to the next slide. Thanks so much. And so between now and October, when we're aiming to have a final version, we're in this feedback on the draft. So we'd really welcome your input, as I say one more time. So leading from here, going to the next slide, and which is probably just a thank you from myself. I also want to thank the panel that we're about to hear from. And so what we'll do is we'll invite each panel member to present their work. I'll follow up with a short question or clarification on an issue of interest. And if there's any questions you might have as a group, please enter them there. We might pick them up then, or we might pick them up during the panel session when all speakers are going to have a discussion. So thank you very much. I hope for a good set of presentations, and I will speak to you shortly. And so for the first presentation, I'll invite Dr. Kate Wilson. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Ian. Perhaps we'll just go straight to the first slide, please. Thank you. So I'm from the New South Wales government. Sorry, well, that's fine, you can stay there. New South Wales is a subnational government in Australia, so it's one of the states in Australia. It's the largest state population-wise, so we have a population of about 8 million, which is roughly 30% of the total Australian population, and it's the largest economy. And like much of Australia, we're very urbanised, so urban buildings are a very important component. It's also quite a big area. I just looked it up, and we're about 40% larger than the island of Sumatra, to give you a bit of context. So I'm in the environment part of the New South Wales government, and I'm lead a division that addresses climate change and sustainability. So we are doing a lot of work on reducing carbon emissions. New South Wales and Australia is somewhat infamous for not having a clear carbon reduction target, but within each of the states we do have net zero plans. So we have a clear target to reach net zero emissions by 2050, and we also have a clear target and a plan to get to a 35% reduction on 2005 levels by 2030. So we're working pretty hard on the different sectors there. I also we do a lot of work on climate resilience, climate adaptation, and increasingly on circular economy, which of course overlaps strongly in the case of building materials. So next slide, please. And following on quite nicely from Ian's introduction, I was going to talk a bit about improving the performance of existing buildings and then go on to future buildings. So next slide, please. So one of our signature programs that we run in Australia is NABERS, the National Australian Built Environment Rating System. So this is actually a program that we run out of New South Wales, but it's a national program. It covers the whole country, and it actually has some federal legislation. It's a rating system, so it delivers in the end a simple rating from 0 to 6 stars, with 6 stars indicating being really leading edge, 5 is really very good, 4 is pretty decent, and then it goes down from there. And it now delivers ratings across several sustainability metrics, but it certainly started with energy efficiency. And this graph just shows the very substantial increase in energy efficiency over time with buildings that have these NABERS ratings. So they're developed for different building typologies. They were initially done for commercial offices. They're now available for shopping centres, data centres, hospitals, schools, and a range of other typologies. And you can see with the offices in particular, over 13 years, that's led to a 37% reduction in energy use in the buildings that have NABERS ratings. So that's compared to, I guess, the baseline. And there were two factors, I think, that accelerated that. One is government procurement. So certainly in New South Wales, the government is a massive organisation, has huge procurement. And we have a government policy that all major offices that we either own or lease have to have a NABERS rating of 5. So we upgraded it recently to 5. And of course, that drives huge competition because we are one of the major users of commercial office blocks in the Sydney CBD. The other element that has been extremely powerful is there's a national scheme for compulsory building disclosure. So when an office is either sold or leased, it's compulsory that the NABERS rating is disclosed. So that has been amazingly powerful, so that there is there is some compulsory levels of energy efficiency in the building code, but essentially NABERS sets up just the disclosure and the transparency which has set up competition between different building managers to provide more energy efficiency, and you can see the results here. It's also increasingly used in metrics both in Australia and globally, and is now being used as a tool to attract more capital to improve the performance of buildings, because it gives a very good way of assessing the outcome on that. Next slide, please. Can we go to the next? Thank you. So the other major scheme that we've been running in New South Wales is what I believe the IEA calls a white certificate scheme. And this one is one where it's got many complicated bits of mathematics behind it, but we set an annual energy savings target, which the energy retailers have to meet. And they meet that by acquiring energy savings certificates. So each certificate is 1 megawatt of energy saved. And there's a whole set of small-scale commercial providers who, these are the people who come to your house, upgrade your lights from incandescent light bulbs to LEDs has been the most common technology so far. Calculate the energy savings, and then they pass on a savings to the customer, and they get their revenue by selling those certificates to the energy providers who are required to purchase a certain amount each year. Over the 10 years from 2009 to 2019, that delivered 32,500 gigawatt hours of energy savings, which is a very significant amount. And it saved, over that period, the calculation, it saved about 50 megatons of greenhouse gas emissions. So for context, that's a bit over 1% of our total state emissions. So that's quite a significant contribution. We've recently announced that this scheme is being expanded. So we'll be bringing on quite a number of new technologies that can contribute, including heat pumps, which you mentioned here as well, Ian, and also some fuel switching technologies. And we're going to gradually ratchet up the ambition of the energy savings over time as well. So it's quite an effective market mechanism that gradually builds energy savings and delivers a whole industry supporting it. Next slide, please. So I'll just talk and move on to the next slide. I'll just talk briefly about two newer initiatives that we're doing, looking at future buildings. So one is, again, as has already been referred to, the whole issue of low emissions building materials. And we've just started a project which is working with industry to try and reduce the embodied emissions in building materials. So we estimate in New South Wales, the production and use of construction materials is responsible for about 10% of our annual total emissions each year. So this again will have a very significant impact, and like others, we're looking at steel, cement, aluminium and other products. And at the moment, what we've been doing is market research and heavily partnering with industry. So we've set up an alliance that's called MECLA, which is the Materials Embodied Carbon Leadership Alliance. So many of the major building industry participants are partnering in that to, I guess, establish supply chains, share technology, and develop a roadmap for the future. So this has just started. It's also complemented by some of our net zero programs, which aim to some of our high emitting industries, which of course include companies like BlueScope Steel, which are producing steel. So we're coming at this from a couple of different approaches. Next slide, please. And the final piece of work that I just wanted to talk about briefly is a new planning policy that we're developing. So the SEP there, that stands for State Environmental Planning Policy. And what it's going to be is taking a principle-based approach to design for developments from the scale of single buildings up to whole precincts. So it will require consideration against these 5 principles. Number 4 is the one that's most relevant for this discussion, which is around sustainable and greener places for the well-being of people and then the environment. We're just developing the policy at the moment, but that will, for instance, incorporate requirements to consider and design buildings so that they are compliant with the target to be net zero by 2050, for example. It will include considerations of water efficiency and of designing for circular economy, so that we've got proper ways of managing waste streams. as well as having more urban canopy and so on. So it won't necessarily be compulsory to meet all of those criteria, but it will be compulsory to put them in the application process for the planning approvals, and will influence that. So this is a good way, I think, of getting those design principles considered right at the outset before the first bit of the building commences. So next slide, please. So just to summarize, I've just talked to you about two existing mechanisms, which are market mechanisms with disclosure, that have been very successful over the past decade or so in New South Wales to very significantly improve energy performance, both of existing commercial buildings and on a residential scale through retrofitting. And also they've created quite a large number of jobs across the supply chain, which is really important to making them successful. And then future buildings, establishing collaboration. I think it's very clear that most of industry is very, very engaged in these challenges now. And also it's great for us to be able to work with our colleagues in the planning department to get these considerations actually built into the planning system at a very early stage. So I'll leave it there, thanks.
Thank you, Kate. That's very inspiring. I don't think anybody can accuse New South Wales of not being ambitious in the efforts you've taken. So that's really great. I was curious to know, because obviously in the experience that the state has had in developing and evolving its policies and strategies, have you found that there's been a shift in, for example, the kind of premise of asking industry and commercial sector? I noticed your buzzword, this way was competition. Seemed to be a lot of that focus. Has that inspired the industry to really shift the way that they're now, demanding for this, and they're using that as a unique selling point of why it makes their effort special? I'm just curious about how that's changed.
Yeah, I think very much so. It's so, for instance, we've been using it recently to publish a sustainable portfolios index, and so companies can see where they rate in overall sustainability. And it's very obvious if you walk around the Sydney Central Business District, you'll see these big placards outside buildings which have the neighbours rating up there in pretty big letters. So you walk past and you can see that building is, that one's not so good, that one's really, really good. So I think that has worked very well, and it's been complemented by the Green Building Council. So there's kind of two sets of metrics, but they work hand in glove, and it has created the sense of, I think, a very collaborative competition. There's a lot of the leading building agencies work together as well on that.
And I think also what you were describing around that lead by example with government action in terms of their own portfolio of what you occupy now, and obviously as the state government, there's lots and lots of buildings, lots of floor space that you command control over, or at least demand for. And again, presumably the response has been that they're ready to provide that once you've asked for it, and that's being also seen in other sectors.
Yeah. So that, again, we do procure a lot of office space, or certainly in the old days we did. And so that has been very powerful by adhering to that and having that requirement. That's just a simple requirement you can put in a government tender document, and that will be one of the the top assessment criteria. So that's pretty good combination of a carrot and a stick, I think.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much, and I'll look forward to some further questions that we'll ask across the panel. For our next speaker, would like to, and make sure I don't get this wrong, so we'll go to the next. Thank you. I would like to invite Michael Weibel from the University of Hamburg, and he's going to speak to us about a project they've initiated and they've been working on among their collaborators. And so, Michael, thank you. Over to you, and I look forward to following up.
Thank you for this nice introduction. I would like to present a project I'm guiding in Cambodia. Next slide, please. It's called Build for People, Enhancing Quality of Life through Sustainable Urban Transformation. It's funded by the German government, the Federal Ministry of Education and Research, and it's a long-term funding program in different phases. Right now, we have just entered the so-called R&D phase of 4 years till 2025. Next slide, please. From the German side, we have 4 universities and 2 companies. Hamburg University is the lead, and we have also Stuttgart University. Dirk Schwede is representing Stuttgart University, participant of this panel discussion as well. And we have many local research, implementation, and dissemination partners. One of the implementation partners is our colleague Sokai Nob from the Ministry of Environment, National Council for Sustainable Development. I'm very happy that you joined this panel discussion today. Funding volume is quite large for German conditions, at least about 3 million euros. And we hope to continue with implementation phase from 25 to 27 as well. Next slide, please. On the left side, you see our project logo I designed myself. It looks a little bit like a dartboard. And the center of this logo is our work package 1, behavior change. That's why we call ourselves also Build for People. We want and would like to promote people-led approaches. That's why we work together with the Department of Environmental Psychology from Magdeburg University. But we have also, of course, a work package Sustainable Building led by Dirk Schwede from Stuttgart University with a work package Sustainable Neighborhoods, and then on more on an urban level, Urban Green, Urban Climate. And our university, Hamburg, is also doing the overall governance approach, Sustainable Urban Transformation. Next slide, please. So, of course, you are well aware of this report. I don't have to basically say anything about it. My point in this respect is that this report also highlighted that operation of buildings is particularly problematic, for example, in the case of mechanical cooling. So it's always also a question of user behavior, not only about cooling habits, but also users are important because they are important decision makers in terms of buying, for example, energy efficient products like cooling devices. Next slide, please. So in Cambodia, sometimes there's the question, yeah, why you as a German research team are promoting this in an emerging country of Southeast Asia. Then I say that looking at the development and sustainability goals in Germany, the building sector has been the most successful one, much in contrast to the transport sectors. We are still very keen on cars, but in the field of sustainable buildings, we have been able to reduce our emissions compared to 1990 by 44%. And we have many good practice examples of eco-settlements like in Freiburg in the Black Forest. Next slide, please. So I would like to give a short overview why Germany has been so successful. They have a clear roadmap with targets. For example, they want to reduce carbon emissions by 80% till 2050. We also follow, since a long time, basically since the 1980s, comprehensive approach involving various stakeholders. We have, of course, the legal dimension with the German Energy Conservation Ordinance, which is adapted to research progress and tightened every couple of years. But at the same time, we have also the German Development Bank providing economic incentives. This has turned out to be a very strong instrument. About 40% of all newly constructed buildings in Germany receive such an economic incentive, which compensates companies and building owners who perform better than the legal requirement. And then we have at the interface of the corporate and political level, the so-called German Energy Agency, who is very active in awareness campaigns, providing information, issuing a so-called energy pass for buildings, and so on. So all in all, we have a very good interplay in Germany between various stakeholders, a mix of top-down and bottom-up approaches. And of course, we also benefit from the fact that in Germany, we have high energy prices, which secure short payback times and public acceptance of such investments. Next slide, please. I mentioned already about the energy pass for buildings promoted by the German Energy Agency, and this turned out to be a very important market instrument. Given these high energy prices, But at the same time, of course, if you want to issue an energy pass, you need experts. And in Germany, we benefit from a large amount of auditors and experts who are involved in this kind of process. And we looking at the example, for example, from Vietnam, we see we have already a legal regulation, an energy efficiency building code, but there's a big lack of experts and auditors. That's why Dirk will explain more about it later on. That's why we have problems with implementation. So we see as another example of institution building, a new agency, a new institution, a German energy agency I mentioned already about, but this has been very successful in also enhancing public awareness and dissemination of policies and energy efficient tools. So looking at the German balance performance, we see it has been highly successful in terms of new construction, but we still see a lot of potential in Germany in the field of refurbishment, of retrofitting of existing buildings. We should achieve about 2% per year, but right now we have only a refurbishment rate of about 1% per year in Germany. But all in all, we can say that the approach of Germany has been pretty successful. Next slide, please. In our project in Cambodia, we perceive during interviews still some lack of technical knowledge. For example, people don't know what is a green building. And, but more importantly, we see that there's more a lack of actionable knowledge on implementation knowledge. So people know, basically they can read publications from EIA or from ADB on energy efficient buildings, but they don't know how to implement it within the existing legal and socioeconomic context. We can relate this to silo mentalities, lock-ins, institutional fragmentation, and it's quite complicated. More specifically in regard of buildings, please the next slide. We perceive the next slide that we have some barriers in regard of sustainable urban transformation in the building sector. We have assumed cost increases. We have, I mentioned about deficiencies of local capacity perceived. Some of our interviewees also said there's a lack of market readiness. And, but also some interviewees said that we need more incentive schemes, that we should promote more platforms, multi-stakeholder platforms, cooperative platforms like Cambodian Green Building Council, and that we are in urgent need of implementation of experimental pilot and demonstration projects. In that case, I can refer to my previous speaker that we have to promote and leading by example and initiate those things. Next slide, please. In our project, we perceive this challenge and against the background that this transformation is not only a technological challenge, but obviously also social, cultural, economic, and political one. That's why we follow that systemic approach, people-led with different disciplines contributing to interventions. I keep it very short now. I'm running a little bit out of time. I just see I have just 1 minute left. So next slide, please. One important component as well are different measures. So we do some living labs. We build up a collaborative platform like a building arena. We support a roadmap development with colleagues and also Dr. Sokhai. We also include the business sector. We promote a building incubator with young and motivated green architects. Next slide, please. We do capacity development because we want to build up capacities at universities integrated into curricula that students know already from during their time of studies about principles of energy efficient designs and so on, and the governance dimension. Next slide, please. And we ourselves do a lot of awareness activities. We published a building exhibition digitally. I'm running out of time, and also in the local language, very important. Next slide, please. We publish or support the publication of an architectural guide with good past examples of climate adapted architecture from the colonial and period and time of new Khmer architecture, following principles of bioclimatic design. And now I'm coming already to the conclusion. So in our project, next slide, please. We have the entry point of the sustainable building sector. We follow a systematic cross-cutting approach. We support a shift towards planning more understood as a dialogue and as a process, rather less top-down and less focused on design. We include the dimension of the urban citizen, the behavior perspective, not only in terms of cooling habits, but also supporting their decisions to buy environmental friendly products. Next slide, please. And finally, we also try to promote urban quality of life, but we have to keep in mind that quality of life is not the same like urban sustainability. And of course, within our project, we have to actively communicate our and transfer our research findings to the public. So from my perspective, to summarize, tackling sustainability also in the field of sustainable buildings is a cross-cutting challenge, which requires holistic governance approaches and sustainable urban transformation approaches. I took 1 minute more. Sorry for that. Thanks a lot for your attention. And that would be my final slide. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Michael. That's really great. And I guess if very inspiring with respect to the project and what it's aiming at doing and what it's already achieved. And I think this is where I was going to ask my one follow-up question, if I might, which is, you mentioned all of these capacity building activities, which seem to fit nicely in terms of the different stakeholders and like. And I just wondered if you could comment on the let's say the readiness for capacity building, or the interest or the like, you know. So is it something that you're seeing is an open door ready to go through, or are you finding you have to, you know, make an argument around why to focus the attention on? Obviously there's so many things to address, but why the attention on building? So it's you comment on that.
Yeah, but if we explain about the global dimension of carbon emissions related to the building sector, obviously there's a strong urge and need to transform the building sector, and that we have to build up knowledge in terms of that. Our university partners are quite open to that. In the field of planning, of course, the planning students are very much used on designing MEPS, designing nice sketches of buildings. So taking into account the governance dimension, taking into account the needs and behavior dimension of users is not a familiar concept until now. So this needs time and has to be developed step by step. We did an urban living lab with the Phnom Penh City Hall, Phnom Penh Government Administration. This was met with great interest and brought together different perspectives. But of course, this is an iterative process and has to be developed step by step. But as I mentioned already, the legal dimension is one side, but it can only be implemented if we have enough capacities, experts, auditors, and so on. And in the case of Vietnam, which is a bit earlier in the promoting the green building development, we perceive this as the biggest bottleneck, a lack of capacity to assess energy performance for buildings in a transparent way. And Dirk, I guess he's my follow-up speaker. He will explain a bit more about this.
That's great. Thank you very much, Michael. And on that note, we'll go to our next slide. So thank you very much, and I'll look forward to your joining the panel as well for Thanks, questions following. So for the next speaker, I'm very pleased to introduce Dr. Dirk Schweed, who's going to speak to us around another related, well, not related project, but of course related area of interest. And I'll hand over to you, please, to your presentation.
Thank you, Ian, for the introduction. We can go to the next slide. I will talk about a project also funded by the German Ministry of Education and Research. It's a also long-term project. We are working on this already now for several years and have also some more months and till 2022 to work on this project. It's called Climate Adapted Material Research for the Social Economic Context in Vietnam. And from this title, you see that we would like to work on first the technical part, which is needed to promote green building, sustainable building, energy efficient building. But on the other hand, we want to pay attention to the social economic context and how do the people live in buildings, and how do they use buildings, and also what is the impact of these of the occupancy and so on. And so we put together a large team which is led by my group at University of Stuttgart. We are engineers working on sustainable building, energy efficient building, energy systems in buildings. But we also have Michael Weibel, who presented just before me as a social geographer. He's looking at the social economic dimension. We have colleagues from Fraunhofer Institute for Building Physics, which is a major research and technical research institution in Germany. If we look at Australia, perhaps it's comparable with CSIRO. Then we have institution which looks at the education of construction workers, and we have an industry partner here. In Vietnam, we have two universities, National University of Civil Engineering, Trong Du Tan University, so one university from the north of Vietnam and one from the south. We have the Vietnamese Institute for Building Materials as a direct partner to Fraunhofer. That is an institute who works on research on and testing on materials directly under the Ministry of Construction. And we have the College of Urban Work and Construction. And as diverse as our consortium is, as are the topics we address, and we want to develop a framework for sustainable building. We can go to the next slide. Yeah, these numbers you can see here, they were presented by Ian in a much more detailed way and much more scientifically based way. But what I want to show here, that of course the building and construction sector represents a large part of the problem: the energy consumption, the resource consumption, the carbon emissions, and also the waste which is generated. So it's very important that we have to address this and talk about embodied carbon, also construction waste, recycling, energy efficiency. But on the other hand, in all these countries we are looking at, if it's Vietnam or Cambodia or China or the other countries in the ASEAN region, it's also a large part of the economy, and the 15% I marked here is probably not enough to show it, because what is connected in the economy to the building sector is much, much more. So there is a lot of drive and a large driver in this construction sector to do good, but also to do bad in terms of sustainable development. And what we also have to see here, that the construction sector is for 100% of the people sets the scene for their daily living. So it's very important that we make it right and that we come to the right answers. The next slide, please. I'm looking with interest at the activities of road mapping here, and here are some depictions of road maps. It's very important that we connect them, of course, globally, that there is a global common agenda what we want to achieve in future, and then it needs to be broken down to the country, to the regions, and to the countries, and then to the municipalities, and so on. And that is what we are talking about today. But also roadmap could be understood on the building level, that we think of our buildings when we design them. How do we want them to perform in future, and what targets we want to achieve, even if we can't achieve them today? And then it's very important to look at the different sectors and to develop, for example, the energy mix from what we have today to a more greener version in future, and then at the end to a renewable energy supply here. We know that we can't do it in one step, but that is also the reason why we do roadmaps here. The development of key technologies is very important, and then also the development of policies, research around this. We go to the next slide. I want to emphasize here for just the building level that in many countries we are working, and also in Vietnam, it's not possible yet from the market condition to build zero emission buildings from the start, but we have to make sure that we can retrofit zero emission technology in future, that the key characteristics of the buildings are fit to achieve this target. And then later, when there is renewable energy applications available, when there are better cooling systems available, that we can implement these into this building. So we have to make sure that the buildings are fit for and future ready to be carbon neutral and future proof by design. So we go to the next slide. Here we have the Kamasek project. The original idea came from the experience in a previous project in Vietnam, that the government want to change from the very resource intensive application of burnt bricks towards more sustainable building materials, here aerated concrete materials. The burnt bricks have the problem, of course, that they use a lot of energy because they are produced in a, let's say, pre-industrial way. They also create a lot of emissions. They destroy a lot of agricultural area, and then the modern materials were brought into the discussion. And then there was first pilot projects, and what happened, that there came some problems from the building physics. There were cracks in the walls, and there were a lot of building physical problems with them and application problems. And then the developer said, no, we can't use this because we don't trust this material. It does not work. We want to go back to our traditional ways. And that was the idea of our project, that we want to set up facilities to make sustainable technology useful and usable, and also to facilitate the implementation of the energy code, which was introduced at the time in Vietnam, so that there are no barriers to sustainable technology applications. We go to the next slide. Here we show one of the key elements of our project. We want to build up research facilities for material characterization and material use, so that we can label materials, and so that designers can choose the right materials, that they can trust materials. And we are building together with the Vietnamese Institute for Building Material Research facilities to do these material testing, material characterization. We go to the next slide. Here we look at the development of basic information. Here, for example, climate data sets to do advanced building simulation studies. We also look at indoor climate measurements in order to inform advanced design processes to achieve better building performance. We go to the next slide. One part of our project is also supported now by Baubildung Sachsen and by the College of Urban Work and Construction. This is to bring the results we have from our research into the training of construction workers, so that construction workers shall learn how to construct with aerated concrete, for example, how to use the new materials, so that the objectives of the green building agenda, of the energy efficiency standard, and also of the other green building objectives can be reached. Then we go to the next slide. Important is also that we bring together the stakeholders, that we create an area for exchange between the general public, between architects, practitioners, designers, industry players, and also the scientific and university area. We built up a center for a competence center for sustainable building in Vietnam to facilitate these exchange. This activity is actually run by my colleague Michael Weibel, and we have established a competence center for sustainable building to facilitate this exchange on the topics, also to make the results of the research of our project and of other projects known to the general public. This is about it. Next slide. Just to summarize, you see that our climate adapted material research project aiming to bring together these different ideas and to support the steps in the roadmap with technical facilities so that the needed technologies can be implemented in the market. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dirk. That was a very comprehensive example around how this project and the partners you're working with seem, to say, be advancing in how we can be building and practically building better buildings in Vietnam. One question I had for you, and maybe this is if you can step back in time, with both this project and the one that you also work with Michael, in setting out that strategy. Could you kind of comment on the value that you had around setting out a roadmap, and in particular kind of how these different angles that you've outlined have fit in towards that? I mean, did they come up unexpectedly, or was this something that you said, no, this has a program and we really developed that up front and we've been following it?
Of course, our project has a program. We have seen that there are problems with the implementation of the new energy code in Vietnam, that people we were talking to said, oh, we would like to build green, and we would like to make a contribution to this much needed development, but we can't do it. We would like to, but the technical conditions are not there, and we don't know enough, and so on. And so the idea of this project was to address some of these points and to try to solve these bottlenecks. For example, infrastructure for material research. If no one knows what heat conductivity material has, or how to use this material so that it can be durable and can be trusted in the application, then it will not work. So we need these research facilities in order to advance the market in the right direction.
That's great. Thank you so much. So I'll invite our next speaker now, who's joining, who's also a collaborator, as you mentioned, but Mr. Sakai Nop, to discuss Cambodia's guidelines around certification for green buildings. So Mr. Nop, thank you very much for joining, and I'll hand over to you for your presentation.
Thank you, Dr. Ian. Can you please upload my presentation?
We can see a presentation, a set of slides, which I believe should hopefully be yours.
Yeah. Okay, that's correct. Okay. I'm going to talk about the development of Cambodia's guidelines and certification for green building. So next, please. Next, please. I'm going to talk 5 key points. First is the current development of the Cambodian guideline certification for green building, and the second is policies and action addressing the buildings and energy sectors. The third, the challenges to achieve buildings and energy, and fifth is opportunities, and last, way forward. Next slide, please. Cambodia construction industry is still one of the main drivers for economic growth, with average 18.1%, and it is the third largest sector contribute to the GDP growth, and the building sectors like residentials and Can you please back to my presentation? It's go further.
We can certainly see the slides. I was just curious which slide or what should be on there, and that way we can. There might be a delay.
You miss me 2 slides. Can you come back?
I think we should be okay on your background slide. Is that correct?
Yes, Nick, previous one. Okay, that's right. Due to the economic growth increasing our population, that resulted in the increasing house demands, and now
I believe there might be a delay between the slide you're seeing and the slide that's on the main presentation. So we currently have a slide entitled Cambodia's GCGB background.
This one, yeah.
Okay, so that's the one we're seeing. Thank you.
Oh, okay, yes, and also demand in infrastructure development and urban space for to accommodate the population growth, and especially for people migrant from rural to the city for jobs and other opportunities. Like building with the low energy performance are the track on the improvement energy productivity and increasing the legs of countries into the trajectory high carbon intensities. And as you know, the cooling of the building presents a significant challenge because of the temperatures become more extreme and due to the climate change intensities. And current population we is 27 people live in urban areas, and we hope to occupy 50% by 2050. Next, please.
It has changed.
Okay, this I would like to give the background of the project certification guidelines in certification for green building. It is implemented by the National Council for Sustainable Development, called NCSDs, and Ministry of Environment, with the funding support from the Republic of Korea via the Mekong Rock Cooperation Fund. With the technical support from the Korean Institute of Civil Engineering and Building Technologies. The project aims to develop guidelines and certification for green buildings, including residential and commercial buildings. The guidelines will involving the green building component, including energies, waters, and materials. This will promote the industry-specific trainings and awareness to the construction and architect association. And of course, by doing the green building guideline certification, we can reduce carbon emission reductions, and also contribute to the Cambodia's commitment to the NDC. Of the UNFCCC. Next, please.
It has changed.
I think probably my internet is slow. Slides. I'm still waiting for the next slide. Okay,
we can see the next slide with a diagram. Thank you.
Okay, yeah. These are the project outputs, and the project aims to provide for output First is a formulated guidelines and certification schemes and operation scheme. The second is establish the interim institution arrangement for the certification. Because why interim? Because in our Cambodian system, we may need times to establish the government body to take the responsibility for this. So first we establish the interim. And the third output is the pilot, the guideline in certification process, as we focus on the residential and commercial bidding. Fourth, we aim to provide awareness raising to government and also like the bidding industries sectors. And the fifth is to improve knowledge sharing between the Mekong countries and also with the Korean side. Next, please.
It has changed.
Okay, I'm still wait. Sorry for that. Okay, as the green buildings guidelines or standard and certification is in the process to develop, we will focus on new buildings and existing building called building in use. For the new building, we will focus on resident and non-resident that we cover 6 categories and 24 criteria. And for the building in use or existing building, we cover all types of building that we belong into the 3 categories and the 9 criteria only. So basically, our green building system we adopted from the German Sustainable Building Council that's called DGNB, and we adopt it with the combination from Korean GSIT system, and also we looking aligned with the neighboring country as well, just like Vietnam's and Thailand in terms of energy, in terms of environment and other criteria. Next, please. So is our green building criteria and the categories. We focus on 6 sustainability dimensions. And next, please. Next slide, please.
It has changed to the policies and actions slide.
Okay. Okay, in this slide, I just give some policies and action has been developed or in the current progress to address the buildings and energy sectors. Like we have the law, we have the climate change action plan for energy sector that include the strategic objective that support the sustainable production and consumption of energies and also the greenhouse gas reduction. And based on the Cambodia's basic energy plan that aim to supply the energy to Cambodian with affordable and accessibility and also the transparency in the energy market. And also we have energy efficiency and conservation master plan that inform the formulation of energy efficiencies, policies and program. And we have the draft environmental and natural resource code that include the sustainable energy. So how can we aim at sustainable energy in the future? And our draft laws on urban planning that suggest 30% of total area designed for green space, and that's for the new urban areas. And also we have the National Green Growth and Strategic Plan that promote the green and resource efficiency production, and this also include the construction and building sector. And we have the draft policy on energy efficiency policy, but you know it was drafted in 2018, but till now it has not been approved yet. This policy is aimed to include the target reduction of energy 25% in the building sector by 2035. Next slide, please.
It has changed.
Okay, and it just like the current effort, like the local energy efficiency design guidelines that led by the Ministry of Mine and Energy that provide guidance to real estate developers to increase energy efficiency in buildings and also contribute to the climate change. And also the building technical regulation is taking lead by the Ministries of Land Management and Urban Construction. It's kind of like our three efforts of the three ministries try to have like alignment in terms of energy in building. And also we have the sub-degree on the energy efficiency standard. I think I'm still waiting for next slides, and that introduce the energy efficiency equipment in the home appliances. And we also have the NDC roadmap for low carbon and climate resilient that provide the guidance toward the climate reduction and energy saving. And more than this, we have other initiatives just like the circular economy strategy and action plan, sustainable consumption and production roadmap that are in the trust process that they identify like the sustainable construction material, reuse of the demolished construction, and also introduce the energy efficiencies in building. Next slide, please. And yeah, and the next slide is just like our current initiative relating to the energy efficiencies, and also how to promote energy efficiencies in our ministries, and also with the Ministry of Education. Next slide, please.
It has changed.
Okay, the next slide is provides I just give information about the opportunity to support the buildings and energy sector that it's come up with. As we already know that the green building provides a huge benefit in terms of environment, economics, and social welfare of humans, and at the same time it presents a challenge as well. So our significant challenge is just like investment in high-rise apartment, entertainment complexes, and commercial building and satellite city that are energy intensive and also not currently using the energy efficiency. We lack of the systematic plan for can you back to the challenges?
Yeah, it's gone back.
Okay, and our buildings not resilient to climate change, particularly increased temperatures and flooding. And we still have informal housing in our Cambodian cities that often made of the recycled materials, and of course it is more vulnerable to the climate change. And we lack of awareness and of energy efficiency opportunity in construction, despite potential opportunity to reduce high electricity costs. And the last challenge is lack funding for a dedicated Cambodian government program on building energy efficiency. Next slide, please. The next slide, I come up with the opportunity, and of course, like the green building guideline certification will provide us like the way that we trying to use resource efficiency in building, and also enable the heat energy and greenhouse gas emission management. And the third point is like build energy efficiency requirement are considered in building technical regulation, as it is an ongoing process. The fourth is disseminate technical guideline and regulation related to buildings and energy to developer and constructor. New like construction project should be required to dedicate the specific space for green corridor and adhere the green building standard. Our another opportunity require public buildings to be designed according to the established green building standard, and the implementations of building energy reporting system, either voluntary or mandatory for electric consuming, and the effective enforcement of green building regulation through independent assessor for compliance checks and roster of professional outside the public sector. And of course, we really need to conduct a study and pilot the low carbon energies and resource efficiency housing. And of course, we really need like the energy management program, whereby energy manager are trained and certified. That is kinds of reduce energy consumption in building. Last, education of architect student in green building designs, education of architect and urban planner in building design, as already presented by Dr. Michelle Weber, that we still need to integrate green building design in our university. Next slide, please. So the last slide, come to the last slide. It is the way forward. First, piloting guideline and certification for green building, as we are at the moment in the current development. So after we have it, we will conduct the pilot for residential and commercial building. Second, institutional arrangement such as establish a green building council. It could be led by the governments or public-private partnership. But let's see, because this we really need to discuss with relevant ministry, and especially for the policy maker. The third, construction and real estate to implement energy efficiency, green building design, water efficiency. And the fourth, industry to promote opportunity for use sustainable material, energy efficiency, renewable energy, water use efficiency, and also environmental pollution control in the manufacturing, just like brick, and also for the garment sector. And also update the building code, as building code has been a long time drafted, and we will provide green building standard consideration to the Ministry of Land Management and Construction to update in the building code. And capacity building and awareness raising are the key to address the energy consumption and sustainable building. Promotion energy efficiency through education, and last is the conduct energy efficiency audit across all government sector, and also the government should be the first to implement it. So thank you very much for your paying attention, and I'm also apologize that my internet speed is still not slow. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Nup. That was a very comprehensive presentation on the, as you said, the current activities of Cambodia and the challenges, opportunities that you're facing. I certainly do have questions, but I'll leave them to the panel discussion when we invite everyone back. So thank you again. For our next speaker, and I just note that we'll try and give some time for discussion, but I'll invite Dr. Xiandang Wang to provide her impressions around improving building energy efficiency in Southeast Asia, coming from the World Bank. Thank you very much.
Hi, good afternoon. Can you hear me? Okay, great. Yeah, so I work at the bank, so I'm going to present the energy efficiency angle from more kind of practitioner point of view. I've been working energy efficiency, renewable energy for more than 20 years in more than 20 countries around the world, but I work in East Asia the longest. I'm now based in Singapore. Next, please. So next slide. Yeah, so today I'm first to talk about what we do at World Bank, and then I will highlight a bit about the policy. You know, even though we're financiers, I can tell you the #1 challenge we have done. We set up a fund, we set up this money for energy efficiency. The #1 challenge is no deals. Okay, I know on the other side you will say no money, but we don't find deals. So the policy really driven the demand. I want to talk a little bit about that, and I'll give you some example of our building energy efficiency projects. Next one, please. So the World Bank Group is now the largest multilateral climate financiers in the world. We do about $20 billion a year climate financing. We just committed to increase the target to increase the climate financing from 28% in the lending portfolio to 35%. We're almost becoming a climate bank now. From our side, in addition to our mainstreaming, we call IBRD in the middle income country and IDA in the low income country financing, we have climate technology fund, which is a 40-year loan without interest rate and highly concessional. We have access to global climate fund, the Green Climate Fund, GCF. We have GEF grant for policy support, institutional strengthening. Next one, please. So in the bank, actually in Southeast Asia, we don't really have that many energy efficiency projects. We have a lot of renewable projects. In Southeast Asia, we have only a sort of pretty comprehensive package in Vietnam. I have tried Indonesia, my colleagues trying in the Philippines. It has been very difficult. So in the bank, the most we do for energy efficiency, we call credit line, which is we provide money through the local banks and mainstreaming energy efficiency through local banks. So for example, we have done this in China. Our $400 million loan leverages $3 billion investment energy efficiency in China. We're doing this in Vietnam. And the second, the instrument we like to use is the partial risk guarantees. We have done this in China for ESCO. We also have this in Vietnam. And I want to say that the guarantees is not a panacea. It's not really reduce the risk. It's really mitigate the perceived risk. For example, your first time ESCO, you have a really good project, you don't have a track record. And in those situations, in this situation, it works. We created a dedicated energy efficiency fund. We financed the ESCOs. Again, in China, we financed the 3 ESCOs at the beginning, and that's more than 20 years ago. And now we grow into almost 7,000 ESCOs with $75 billion energy performance contract a year. We financed the famous ESL in India, super ESCO model. But those all need government support. On building side, we have done most in public buildings. I'm going to give some examples, and we have done commercial buildings. I don't think we have done much in residential buildings. It's just really, really difficult. Yeah, next one, please. So I just want to briefly talk about the barriers. People say energy efficiency is low-hanging fruit. Actually, it's much more difficult, I would say, than renewable energy, right? It's not so much low-hanging fruit. I think the #1 issue is really institutional, right? I mentioned, everywhere we go, for South Asia, we have hydro, we have geothermal, solar, we have all these renewable projects. And when we talk about energy efficiency, it's just kind of nobody's priority. I think that's boiled down to why energy efficiency is so difficult. And the second I want to highlight is the financing barrier. I mentioned, we have set up the fund or credit line. We put a few $1 million on the table. And then when the project starts, there's no deals, right? And part of it is because the policy environment is not enough sort of a conducive policy to create demand. But I think fundamentally, I work with lots of banks, okay? The banks really looking for a triple ranking client, okay? They don't care what you do. They just want to be paid back. And these energy service companies, for example, lots of energy efficiency project by ESCOs, they don't have, they're not certainly not AAA ranking client. They don't have a collateral. So it's just this mismatch, so that's I think where the financing bottleneck really is. Next one, please. So in all our energy efficiency programs, we try to kind of use these 3 kind of key ingredients. First to set up the policy right, and then have the business model financing mechanism. So for Vietnam, for example, we're really helping them to put a mandatory target. I took them, all the senior government official from IOIT to China to India, then we help them have this national energy efficiency program, which was approved by their Prime Minister's office in 2019. And then we're helping them on the implementation level at the provincial level. And then the business model, if there's ESCO or it's institutional, dedicated agency, and then we work on the financing. So these have to be the 3 ingredients go hands in hands. If you're missing one, it's not going to happen. Next one, please. So I'm just summarize the whole energy efficiency policy and sort of put in the 3 baskets. The first is really about the stick, you just have to regulate. There is a school of thought that energy efficiency have so many barriers, just have to regulate, mandatory targets, standards for building, particular building codes. And in US, in Europe, you have this efficiency standards, obligations. Basically, you put a mandatory requirement, utilities have to do energy efficiency, right? Those are really effective to increase market demand, but enforcement is issue, particularly for like building codes, right? The second is really about carrot, provide fund, overcoming the incentives, overcoming upfront costs, or increase affordability, but the money has to come from somewhere. And my favorite is what we have done in South Africa with the standard offer model, where when you have a verified kilowatt hour, then you provide a subsidy, so it's output-based subsidy. We feel is more straightforward, kind of equivalent to feed-in tariff for renewable energy in that sense. Of course, then you have the pricing, is the crust of it, but it's really difficult, I think, in most developing countries because you need a political will to increase the tariff. So overall, I think we need to combine the stick and carrot. And we found that mandatory output-based policies are far more effective. Next one, please. So I'm going to talk sort of two examples, what we have done for energy efficiency in buildings. What we have done most is for government buildings, right? We have done a lot in East Europe, where actually I'm working now, and Mexico. So those, in North America also, when you talk about building energy efficiency, the most they have done the commercial market is the government market, right? So because you have one client, okay, the government should play the leadership role for retrofit their buildings. But there are two main issues. One is that how the government budget work, right? If I'm a school or a government building, I receive 100, for my energy budget this year. If I save for 80, next year I got 80. So there's no incentive for me to save whatsoever. That is a fundamental problem. And second is where the money comes from, So we have done this energy service agreement model, which I will demonstrate next slide. The second we have done is in Shanghai, in China. We have retrofitted commercial buildings. I know you talk a lot about new buildings, which is relatively easy. You have the building codes, but the retrofit building is really, really hard because if they don't want to retrofit, there's not much you can do. I heard the Australian model. We also look at New York model, this name and shame, you put this thing. In developing country, it doesn't work. They don't shame, so lots of things is really, really difficult. And we have, like I said, I work with lots of banks. For banks, they're saying we don't even know who are the borrowers for building energy efficiency. We have done lots of industry energy efficiency for big industry enterprises, for ESCOs. This is where in Asia, I think most energy efficiency happening, right? For buildings, the building owners, yes, they can, but usually they don't want to. They're not interested to do the building retrofit. So ESCOs is really the backbone, I would say, for building retrofit building efficiency. But each deal can be less than $100,000. It's so small, right? So when we work on this, we look at lots of the business models. So the aggregation is really the key. We look at the hotel. The Four Seasons hotel have a whole chain. You got one client, you get multiple buildings. You have these Walmart like retail chains. You have something like this. You have one client, and then you get multiple buildings. This is the best aggregation, right? We found these multiple ownership buildings are the most difficult, right? You have to convince every owners in the building to do the retrofit. It's just almost impossible. And for the building retrofit, I would say that the carrot is really important. Next one, please. So I'll give you an example of what we did in Mexico for the public buildings. We're now trying to do similar things in the Philippines. We're looking into how to help Philippines to the government buildings. So what we did is our money goes through this Ministry of Energy and set up a fund. The fund is kind of like a government super ESCO. They do auditing and they sign these energy saving agreements with the municipalities to retrofit their buildings. And then the money will put an escrow account with a CFE with the utility and then flow to the fund. Then will become a kind of revolving fund. Next one, please. Next slide, please. So you can see that, so whatever the municipality pays the bill, and they will go to this escrow account through the utility. So this is sort of guaranteed for that. It's more kind of assured way for the fund to receive the funding. And then whatever the investment, the saving, will put into repay the investment for the energy efficiency investment, and that become a revolving fund for the fund to do more government building. So that's kind of mechanism we use in Mexico and many other East European countries like Armenia and other countries. Next one, please. So in Shanghai, we were looking into how they become the leading low carbon city. So we first time did this abatement cost curve in this district. This was more than 10 years ago. We found that it's a commercial district. This is where the Hongqiao airport is, in that district. And the building retrofit actually is the largest mitigation potential. So we kind of zoomed into this area. The last one, please. The next slide, please. So we start to, we put down $100 million and leverage another 100 million from the two local banks, really to do the building retrofit for commercial buildings. And I mentioned we did all this business model, how to do it, how to do the demand aggregation. It's been really difficult. We also did a pilot, a net zero emission building. We covered incremental cost. And to really combine, coupled with this investment, we had the technical assistance, we have the policy support, where the municipalities doubled the incentive provided by the national government, and they also set up this online monitoring platform, to monitor the energy savings, M&B. So this is a kind of a full package support for the building energy efficiency effort. I'll stop here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jiandong. That was really great to hear. And I think the thing that perked my ear was have money, need deals. So I think this is the kind of challenge to the audience, is where you where for those to bring forward that to their local markets, and of course to create change for investing in building energy efficiency. Maybe just one quick question to you is before we bring back everybody now as you come back on, is just around that that client track record around working with governments. Is it that you see again that there's an interest, an open door that people are walking through, or do you have to spend that time really convincing them to say, build an interest to take financing to be able to assist in this area? Is it really a struggle, or do you find that there's a lot of willingness?
It's definitely a struggle. So energy efficiency, I feel like an orphan, nobody really care, nobody really, champion that. And it's quite difficult. We have to make a case. I mean, of course, it depends. Some governments are more keen than others. But overall, compared to, like, say, renewable, you have IPP, you have all the government. It's the supply side, it's more traditional, it's much more keen, government much more keen to work with us on renewable. But energy efficiency, it has been really, really difficult. So that's why I'm saying, particularly I think ASEAN countries really, really need to have the catch-up work to do. We're really hard to convince the government to come along, we provide support, we provide, even grant to helping them. Sometimes it's really difficult. Yeah.
Thanks so much. And maybe this will kind of enter into the first question I have. In particular, I'll start in asking, perhaps from Kate, your perspective. It's being clear that governments and policies really play an important role in creating that market for change and investment and the like. But I'm just curious about, in your experience, what form of policies have you been finding as being most effective in achieving that change? If you had to pick one type as being the one that you would put more eggs into the basket behind.
Well, I take on board Jiandong's comment just now that the naming and shaming doesn't work. But I think I was reflecting. I think there's been a question in the chat as well about the difference between compulsory and voluntary mechanisms. I think a subtle blend of the two is most effective. So the problem with a purely regulatory approach is people then just usually is not complied with very well. So for instance, we do have mandatory building efficiency standards, for new projects and for renovations here, but they're design standards and they're almost always not really complied with in the operation. Whereas the beauty of the neighbours one is it does have a compulsory element, because the disclosure is compulsory, doing the ratings becomes compulsory, but it has created, it's partly competition, it's a real marketing advantage where there's significant commercial, it's created significant commercial advantage. So I think that the neighbours one still remains probably the favourite, because it's got that incentive structure, and it's also really, really simple to understand. It's just 1 to 6 stars. There's nothing complicated about it at all, and it can be adapted to new areas. So it's now beginning to look at developing a star rating for embodied carbon as well, and net zero buildings. So it sort of develops this whole cohort of groups that subscribe to it and use it.
Thank you. So it sounds like flexibility, I suppose, is what you're saying in terms of being able to have policies that are reflective of the various interests and incentives that are built into that. Mr. Nup, I was curious from your perspective for Cambodia as well. Have you found in that whole raft of legislation and drafts that are coming forward, is there a particular policy type that you found of most interest to legislators that they've, in your experience, wanted to try and pursue? And does it match what Kate has just said? I'm not sure if you were able to hear the question, Mr. Nup.
Can you please repeat your question again?
Sure. It was a question related to your experience in Cambodia of what type of legislation or what type of policies have been most of interest to your policymakers, and does that fit with Kate's experience around having a flexibility of policies, or is there a particular favorite type that's being employed right now?
To me, I think like the market-based policy is the base policy option for us. But actually, we have matching our thinking. Before we make a decision, we need to have like the concrete evidence for making decision. For example, like at the moment that we are making our decision relating to the derived fuel that convert the waste to energy for cement manufacturing, and the government would like to know the full feasibility study before we can make decision. It means that we need to know the cost and benefits of this. So meaning that policy will be developed when we have like a concrete evidence that we can make a good decision. But most of our decision we may choose the economics because we are developing countries, so it's better to increase our people's incomes, and then environmental come later.
That's very interesting. I'll just pick up on the point that you made about that. I suppose that kind of experience or the guarantee that the technologies are going to be doing what they think they should be doing. And maybe this brings me to my next question, which I'll direct to both Michael and Dirk, which is around, what technologies do you see as being most influential or most important for policymakers to incentivize or to highlight in their policies that fit the context of ASEAN in your experience? So either Michael or Dirk, you're welcome to jump in on whichever you think.
Obviously, AC technologies are the biggest source of power consumption in the household. So strong focus should be on promoting and incentivizing high energy efficient AC devices. Maybe Dirk can add to that as well.
Yes, I agree. If we want to reduce energy consumption in the building sector, I think the AC technology is very important. And we also know that there is much more efficient technology out there, not only in the laboratories, but also in other countries. When we look at Vietnam, for example, the highest rating, the 5-star rating for AC equipment is not, let's say, the last we can do with our technology we have today. So it is possible to move forward there, and that should be addressed in policies. But I also wanted to say something about perhaps we don't always need to look if technologies have proven their performance or if they make a business case and so on, because we need to reduce carbon emissions. And if you look, for example, at the feed-in tariff in Germany, which created a lot of business for the photovoltaic industry. At that time, when that was introduced, it was not obvious that this would be successful. It the technology was not really finished and so on. I think we need more like this initiatives from the policy sector to advance the technologies we need to achieve zero carbon in the future.
Thank you. That's a really important issue, I suppose, around that sharing of risk, which is, in terms of implementation and in terms of policies, there's got to be an element of risk associated with that. And maybe Jiandong, over to you with someone who kind of works with risk, is in particular around deployment and technologies. Where do you find that there is that concern? Do you hear what Mr. Knopp is saying in terms of that kind of need to have a really secure foundation as being one of the key issues, or are you seeing that actually there's a willingness to take a risk so long as that there's a mitigating measure around the financing of it? Oh, I think you might be on mute.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. So first, I want to comment on the first question. What the Kate said was quite interesting, because this is really, really important. I see most, if not all, ASEAN countries have voluntary energy efficiency policies. And I can tell you that voluntary energy efficiency policies without coupled with financial incentives, it does not work. Okay, and we have seen this again, country after country, it does not work. Nobody voluntarily save energy, period. So, so we have seen this in China, India. When you have the voluntary, it didn't work, and until they have this mandatory target, India have the PAT, and it really worked. So I'm a big fan of regulations. And unless you like Netherlands, you have the voluntary agreement, together with tax incentives and financial incentives. But in ASEAN countries, I have not seen any country provide substantive incentives in terms of subsidy for energy efficiency anywhere. So in that case, I would say use regulation. In terms of the risk, for energy efficiency, in terms of financing, there are two major risks. One is credit risk, the other is performance risk, right? So we did have, some of the performance guarantee kind of model for ESCOs, but in our experience, for example, in China, we have done by now probably almost $5 billion energy efficiency investment under just the project we financed. I think the performance risk is not that high. I think it's really about boiling down to credit risk. That is what's really boiled down to, because most of the like I mentioned, the ESCO is not credit worthy and they don't have collateral. And even if you use the industry enterprise in our most of cases, the industry enterprise, some of them are almost phased out. The polluting industry, like in China, they're phase out. So it's really difficult. The building owners, normally they don't even want to do the building retrofit. So I think the credit risk is the one that for energy efficiency is a real risk that need to be mitigated. So that's some of our partial risk guarantee project. Is really try to share that credit risk. Yeah.
Thank you. That and something which you've highlighted, which I'm going to come to the group to ask, given we have just a few minutes left. But the experience around building coalitions of partnerships and necessary to create that success. I was just curious. Just maybe we can start. I'll say from left to right. Just the experience around how you've seen coalitions of the willing to address climate change, to address energy performance come together. Is there a message that you've used that helps to build that coalition of interest and action? So Mr. Knopp, perhaps I could start with you. If there's a kind of a message that you've seen has really resonated to build groups of effort.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ian. Related to the effective ways of building coalition, partnership. I think so far, like we have like the private partnership engagement that created by the government, and so far that we use this platform for like the government sector between the government and Cambodia. Later on, like the government includes all private sectors to discuss their business challenges and opportunity, in order to the way that the government can improve the doing business. So build on these kinds of model, I think that the coalition with the multi-stakeholder from the public sector, private sectors, and also like from the NGOs and development partners can build a better position for like building coalition, and also from like from just like I mean in the in energy sectors, like the government just like is doing the way that we are going to do like the energy efficiencies investment, that the government can create a fund for private sectors to improve their production, and
right.
And also
sorry, I'll just,
yep.
That's really helpful. I just in the last few moments, perhaps I might just invite the others to also comment in a word, you know, what key message would they bring to building a coalition as well, just before we summarize for the group.
Okay.
Anybody else wants to step in? Oh.
I think I would say probably it's a strong common purpose. So, you know, we've got a thing called a Better Building Partnership, which the City of Sydney has done, which brings together the leading building groups who can see, you know, the financial and commercial advantage for them of working together. So they've got an ambition to save energy, but ultimately it's the financial commercial driver. And likewise with our work now on low-embodied carbon, I think the companies that are participating, you know, there's the good aspiration to reduce carbons, but it's because it is a major commercial risk for them if they don't do that. So a really strong common purpose.
Common purpose. I'm conscious of the time, and what I'll do at this moment is perhaps we'll leave on that note, which is a common purpose that we all share here today, and of course in working in our respective countries. And I'll invite Rio to come back and thank everyone. But just before I do, to give my own thanks to you all. I mean, we've heard some really exciting programs and actions and activity areas, and I deeply appreciate your joining us today. Thank you, and to Rio.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Ian, and thank you so much, all speakers. We'd like to thank you all participants for your participation in this today's webinar. We hope the webinar has provided you the significant benefit and useful reference regarding the key role of policy framework for sustainable building. So we noticed some interesting takeaways from this webinar. The speakers have highlighted the disclosure of policy have been successfully in improving energy efficiency performance in the building sectors. Support from multilateral donors have supported capacity building and research data in Indonesia and Vietnam. And according to the World Bank, bankable energy efficiency projects are lacking, and mandatory energy efficiency target may be necessary to drive widespread adoption in the country. Thank you so much again, all the speakers, and we hope to have the opportunity to work with you again in the future. And sorry, could you please to the next slide, please, to the survey. All right. As your feedback into the roadmap process is really important to us, we have designed a survey to gather some insight and data on the buildings and cooling sectors in the region to strengthen our understanding on the current status on trends in the policy and technology. The questionnaire contains a total of 8 sessions, and it should take around 15 to answer. We would greatly appreciate if you could fill this in, and please prioritize the section you are most familiar with. We will send you again the link of the survey to your email letter after this webinar. And as a closing, thank you again for everyone for your cooperation and support. And we wish you to welcome you all again to the future events, to our future events, and keep safe and healthy, everyone. And bye-bye from the ASEAN Center for Energy. Thank you so much.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks, Sakai, for your participation. Much appreciated. See you soon.
Okay, thank you, Lemia. See you. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. So, how do I get out?
Thank you, everyone.
How do we get out?
Thank you.
I'm not sure.
I think you just have to close the application.
I think so.
I try. Okay, bye.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you, Ken. We appreciate it.